welcome viewers. I'm Pia and you're watching NewsX World. Let's take a look at the top headlines this hour. US President Donald Trump has stated that Israel has agreed to the initial withdrawal line and that Hamas's agreement will trigger an immediate ceasefire and pave the path towards the return of the hostages and prisoners by both sides. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has warned that the demilitarization of Gaza will happen either by Trump's plan or by Israel's military. This comes after he agreed to the initial withdrawal proposal made by Trump. The activists detained by Israel from the global Summit flotilla, who have now been released, have alleged severe mistreatment in Israeli custody, particularly with Swedish activist Greta Thunberg. Syria is holding its first parliamentary elections 10 months after rebel groups led by Ahmed al-Shara, the current president, overthrew Bashar al-Assad to end a brutal civil war. The election is not being held across the entire country, with provinces like Sweda, Raqqa and Hasaka excluded due to recent unrest. Billionaire Andrej Babis's populist ANO party has taken a commanding lead in the Czech Republic's parliamentary election, but is on track to fall short of a majority. With ballots from more than 97% of polling stations counted, ANO had secured 35% of the vote, according to the Czech Statistical Office. Typhoon Matmo is strengthening ahead of its landfall in China, prompting the government to evacuate 150,000 people from southern Guangdong province. The storm had sustained maximum wind speeds of 151 kilometers per hour, according to China's Meteorological National Center. North Korean leader Kim Jong-un has stated that Pyongyang has allocated strategic assets to respond to the buildup of US military forces in South Korea and has vowed to develop additional military measures. North Korea's state-run television has aired footage of Kim delivering a speech at a military hardware exhibition, emphasizing upon this. Blasts were heard around Gaza, with smoke plumes spotted in several places as American President Donald Trump has urged Israel to scale back operations in the Palestinian territory. All right, viewers, those are the headlines and our top focus. What's happening in the Middle East? Plumes of smoke were spotted in the Gaza skyline, and explosions were also reported early today morning, even as US President Donald Trump has pressed on for a scale back of IDF operations in the city to allow the cessation of hostilities in order to progress according to his 20-point peace plan. Now, according to local health officials, 36 people have lost their lives in these strikes ever since Trump announced his plan and called Israel to begin withdrawing from Gaza. Hamas leaders are understood to be willing to accept President Trump's plan, but have not issued a formal statement about the entire issue, and there are still 3 to 4 points which are being contested. With us on the broadcast is Mr. Peter Baum, foreign editor of Weekly Blitz, joining us from London. Thank you so much, sir, for taking our time and speaking to us on NewsX World. After Trump's ultimatum, Hamas expressed willingness to release all Israeli hostages. In fact, negotiations to discuss the details to iron out the specifics will take place in Cairo, with the U.S. Special Envoy being involved as well. How do you view this development? Is this a genuine breakthrough or a tactical move?
No, I think it's a genuine breakthrough here. According to all sources, especially those in the Arab world and in the European Union, this could be an historic achievement. It seems that both sides are virtually there, except that Hamas are sticking, as I understand it, to certain areas from which they believe if they don't challenge, they will lose entire political control. I think they've virtually accepted that they will lose military control, but they do want to play a role in the new Gaza going forward. and I think it will be up to the Egyptian negotiators to try and force them not to have more flexibility on this. But certainly, to answer your question, this seems to be a real breakthrough and not just both sides playing games for strategic purposes. We are virtually there for a complete ceasefire.
Indeed. However, Hamas has not agreed to disarm. Now, in this context, what are the risks if a ceasefire is in place and Hamas retains even part of its stockpile, the weapons stockpile or tunnel infrastructure?
Yes, indeed. This seems to be the main sticking point. Um, if we look at it pragmatically, it's whether or not Hamas will have any kind of military capability in the new Gaza. Now, all players, apart from Hamas, do not want them to have such a role. So this is where the Qataris, the Egyptians, and obviously the Americans will need to exert as much pressure as possible on Hamas to climb down from that position. And that's also why we're seeing the Israelis, given your headlines just now, continue with the bombardment, albeit not as devastating as in previous days on Gaza. The other thing to bear in mind now is that it's virtually assured that the vast majority of the civilian population of Gaza has left. So the only people there are a few perhaps remaining family members of the Hamas operatives and Hamas themselves. And I think that's why we're seeing the continuing use of weapons by Israel in Gaza in order to exert further pressure on Hamas. That may backfire, we don't know, but it's really up to the Qataris, the Egyptians, the Americans to put so much pressure on Hamas and to tell them that there is certainly going to be no military role for them. Whether or not they will have a political role to play, I think could be a little incentive for them to lay down their arms.
Indeed, and in the meantime, Hamas has also agreed to hand over administrative powers in Gaza to the technocratic Palestinian body as outlined in the 20-point peace plan. However, only once national consensus is achieved. At the same time, their statement excludes any reference to the proposed board of peace that Trump is touted to be heading, along with Tony Blair being a member as well. In your assessment, is this then an attempt by Hamas to retain control while avoiding external oversight?
Probably, but I think we're at the stage now that they are clutching at straws. There is absolutely no way that any of the participating and active players are going to allow Hamas any kind of military role, but the door could be left open for them to have some kind of political role. This is where I see these negotiations ending. I think it would be totally unreasonable for Hamas to concede to every point and just give up. As much as I would like them to do, and as much as most morally decent people, all morally decent people would like them to do. But I think they're going to try and maintain some kind of political power, to have some kind of role, albeit a minor one, in the new Gaza. And I think the door could be left open to them after negotiations and after the Egyptians and Qataris exert pressure on them. That has yet to be determined, but by their statements that they're happy to concede power to a technocratic Palestinian administration also seems to be a sign that they recognise that the powers that they had before October the 7th have been severely diminished.
All right, so I request you to stay on with us as we're tracking further updates from the Middle East. We're now learning that Syria will be holding its first parliamentary election since the fall of the Bashar al-Assad regime. This comes amid concerns over inclusivity and successive delays. The voting process is underway. As you can see on your screens, live visuals are coming in from Damascus. There will be no direct vote for the People's Assembly, which will be responsible for legislation during the transitional period. Instead, electoral colleges will select representatives for 2/3 of the 210 seats, and the rest will be appointed by interim president Ahmed al-Sharaa. The polls are being overseen by the Higher Committee for Syrian People's Assembly elections, whose 11 members were chosen by al-Sharaa back in June. Now, the number of seats allocated in each of the 60 districts is based on census data collected in 2010, the year before the country descended into a civil war that killed more than 600,000 people and displaced another 12 million. Still with us on the broadcast is Mr. Peter Bohm. We're seeing live visuals coming in from Damascus regarding this voting procedure, but 1/3 of the elected members are going to be chosen by al-Sharaa itself, raising a lot of questions about the transparency and whether, of course, he's more likely to come back to power is what critics are pointing out. In your assessment, is this just optics or a step towards genuine democratization down the road in the long run?
Okay, let's pick this out by its little pieces. From where we are, from where we've come to in Syria to where we are now, has been nothing short of miraculous. The country was going through chaos under Assad. No one knows of the exact number of deaths. I think perhaps 600,000, and millions displaced. So to have any kind of election that, though not perfect by any means, but to have any kind of election, even on this complicated basis that the current Syrian government has created, must be welcomed. It is true that the way the government has constructed the elections via the electoral college picking representatives and by the number of electoral colleges selected by the government itself, it does mean, if you drill down, that something like 15 of the 1,500 or so candidates to be representative, approximately 70% of them effectively are going to be chosen by the Syrian regime, which does seem a bit totalitarian, but nevertheless, from where we are to where we were, I think has been absolutely astounding. And there's something else that should be recognised. That leading up to the election, when the way the election was going to be constructed, some 14 or 15 Syrian human rights groups, including journalists, women's groups, academics, etc., actually came out and criticised the government because of the power it would have over the electoral college. Now, could you imagine, going back to the days of Assad, if 15 Syrian independent Syrian organisations came out and criticised Assad, they would have all been jailed, incarcerated, many of them killed, or banished to other countries. So the mere fact that the new government has allowed these independent groups to criticise it, and they've recognised it's not perfect, but from where the government, from what the government was brought in to create and construct, to have these elections in such a short space of time, I think is a real, to answer your question, is a real step forward. It's a shame, unfortunately, in the Kurdish areas and in some of the Druze areas, which has recently seen fighting between various militias, government groups and the Druze themselves, that elections couldn't be held. It would be hoped in the months ahead, certainly in the Kurdish areas and the Druze areas, that elections can be held, even if they're based on this similar construct that the government has created. So I think, yes, a real step forward.
All right, sir. With that, I would like to thank you for taking out time and sharing your perspective with us on NewsX World. With that, viewers, we're shifting our focus towards what's transpiring in Europe. A NATO member, Poland, has now stated that it scrambled aircrafts to ensure the safety of its airspace after Russia launched airstrikes on Ukraine. Now, Ukraine, meanwhile, has reported that missiles and drones are raining down on the Lviv region near the Polish border. Poland's operational command, General Bronislaw, has stated that Polish and allied aircrafts are operating in the airspace while ground-based air defense and radar reconnaissance systems have been brought to the highest state of readiness. At the eastern flank, particularly members related to that, they're on high alert after Poland shot down suspected Russian drones in its airspace back in September, and frequent drone sightings and air incursions had also taken place in Romania and Lithuania as well, and Copenhagen and Munich. This has led to chaos in European aviation too. All right, viewers, with that, we shift our focus to more developments coming in. Bitcoin, the world's largest cryptocurrency by market value, has hit a record high and is up nearly 2.7% at $125,245 US. Bitcoin's previous record was USD 124,480 in mid-August. Now, this has been buoyed by friendlier regulations from US President Donald Trump's administration and strong demand from institutional investors. The cryptocurrency had risen earlier for an 8th straight session, bolstered by recent gains in US equities and inflows into Bitcoin exchange-traded funds. Meanwhile, surrounding the US government shutdown clouded the outlook and delayed key data releases such as payrolls, which are critical for gauging the economy's direction as well. With us on the broadcast is Dr. Ajay Dua, former Commerce Secretary of India, joining us. He's joining us from New Delhi. Thank you so much for taking out time and speaking to us on NewsX World. Given this rise that we're seeing in the value of Bitcoin, as this is taking place simultaneously as the US dollar is retreating, could we then see cryptocurrencies increasingly being viewed as alternatives to traditional fiat currencies, especially during periods of economic uncertainty such as the shutdown that we're witnessing in the United States at the moment?
Thank you for having me on your show. I'm not sure whether cryptocurrencies, particularly 3 of them, which are the popular ones, Bitcoin, Ethereum, and Solana, all of them have experienced, no doubt, increase in their prices between 2 and 3% in the last 1 week, particularly. Whether they are large enough in terms of quantity to be able to replace conventional currency is yet to be seen, because I say this because the dollar, the US dollar, apart from being the accepted currency in the US, is a reserve for most of the world as still. And there, the acceptability of cryptocurrency, including Bitcoin, outside the US is not as high as it is there. So that's the answer to, or my take on the first point. The second is on why has it actually risen? It has risen largely because of data by a private company, a private survey, a monthly survey. You see, the US government has not been able to put out the official employment data because from 1st of October, the US administration is no longer operational because of the budget constraints. But the private data also pointed out what the US official data would have had it come out, that there has been a fall in the employment during the month of September in the US. So what is expected now? That if the economy is not doing well, that the US Fed can be expected to lower the interest rates, the policy rates, next month in the month of November when it meets. With that, interest rates falling, the investors are looking at saying that if the bonds, which is the main alternative investment in the US and a very largely accepted one, if the bond yields are going to come down, why not go in for getting higher yields? It's worthwhile going in for Bitcoin, other cryptocurrencies, as well as equities. So you would see going forward that if the trend remains, irrespective of whether the US government is working or not, and the impact is going to be on what the Fed does. But as of today, the expectation is that the Fed, which has now started, otherwise so far it was sitting very tightly, saying that Mr. Powell was not willing to relent and reduce the interest rates. But now that he has agreed and he has effected 0.25 reduction only about 2 weeks ago, it is expected that an equal, if not a larger, lowering down of interest would come about next month. And that is why people are moving, investors are moving towards riskier. Cryptocurrency is certainly riskier than bonds, but and so are the equities, as we all know, that towards the move for the last 4 or 5 days, or 3 days for sure, since last Thursday, has been towards a greater demand for the riskier investments.
And speaking about the shutdown that we're seeing in the United States, employees are currently furloughed, salaries are not being handed out as well, crucial data is also not being released, and it's likely that consumption will also fall. And this is something that Secretary Bessent has also pointed towards, that the US economy might be dented because of the current shutdown that we are witnessing. As you've pointed out, it's very likely that the Fed could reduce the interest rates, but to further mitigate the snowball effect, what else, what other measures could be taken?
I think the shutdown of the Fed, shutdown in the US administration, a prolonged one, is certainly not desirable. The US economy has, whether President Trump admits it or not, has been impacted by the tariffs, the high tariff walls which he has created. Who's going to be paying for it? At the end of the day, it is the US customer. If the US customer doesn't get paid, the workers do not get paid, the impact upon them is going to be adverse, and certainly you would see the demand coming down. To have Fed is trying to correct it by lowering the interest rates, saying if people want to borrow, yes, please, because you could, we have reduced the policy rates, the banks would give you money at cheaper rate, banks and the affected, all the people who lend money, institutions who lend money in the US, but the impact is going to be there. And if it is combined with inflation, then it's a very, on one side, demand coming down. Second, the impact of the tariffs is making things costlier. It is a recession which is at a time of inflation, which is a very rare phenomena. And it is partly, absolutely you're right, because of the US administration closing down, salaries not getting paid. And this is the first time we are seeing that in the last 2 years. We have seen 3 such situations in the past when there was an expectation that because the budget has not been passed for some reason or the other, like there is a reason now this time, as well as the insurance costs, it didn't get down to actually the administration shutting down. The last moment, the leaders of the 2 parties would meet, the House leaders, and come out with a solution. This time, that's not happened. The US is actually facing a shutdown, experiencing a shutdown for the last 3 or 4 days. And the way President Trump seems nonchalant about it, he hasn't made any political move to get it resolved. Political move means he has to talk to the Democrat leaders, whether you like it or not, because they are in a large number in the House of Representatives, and the bill has to be passed by both the Congress, House of Reps, as well as the Senate.
Indeed, as you pointed out, Dr. Dua, it will be tough to see how the US plans to deal with this double whammy. I request you to stay on with us as we track further updates. We're now learning that members of the OPEC Plus alliance are set to meet virtually later today to discuss the size of crude output. There are 8 members in the OPEC Plus group, including Russia, Saudi Arabia, Iraq and the UAE. The 2 biggest oil producers, Saudi Arabia and Russia, have been at odds over the size of output increases, but have always found a compromise. Now, in this particular meeting, Russia is expected to oppose any sizable increase in quotas. Russia would prefer the group to raise output by 137,000 barrels per day from November. Under the current sanctions, it would be difficult for Russia to increase production drastically. However, Saudi Arabia may prefer doubling or even tripling production, as it possesses the capability to ramp up output very quickly. Therefore, this meeting comes as in recent months, OPEC Plus has tried to regain its market share in the face of competition from other countries, especially the United States, Brazil, Canada, Guyana and Argentina. Now, OPEC remains optimistic in its latest projection of global oil demand, forecasting an increase of 1.3 million barrels per day in 2025 and 1.4 million barrels per day in 2026. Now, against this backdrop, the possibility of a larger increase in the grouping's quotas has sent the price of Brent crude, that is the global benchmark for crude oil, plunging below $65 per barrel, which is a loss of around 8% in a week. Still with us on the broadcast is Dr. Ajay Dua. Interesting, different approaches being adopted by Russia and Saudi Arabia ahead of this very crucial virtual meeting that is going to take place. In your assessment, what could be the short-term and long-term impact of these differing approaches?
I'm very conscious of the fact that Russia is no longer playing ball with OPEC. Actually, if you recall, Russia is no longer a member of the OPEC. It had, because of differences exactly on these kind of issues, how much of production cuts should be made or increases should be made. Russia had quit OPEC a couple of years ago, or 3 years ago to be precise. Now it comes in the category of OPEC. The plus producers, OPEC plus the other producers, and Russia is a large producer, no doubt. But with sanctions being now again talked about and more vociferously by the US and the European Union, the so-called NATO members, Russia is being realistic, and it's saying that the increase should be modest, and the figure which you quoted, just about 0.14 million tons is what they are talking about, is the increase which they can effect, and that will impact the overall one. Whereas the under pressure, and there is exactly no other reason that the other members of OPEC, and as you know, the biggest producer and the most influential one there is Saudi Arabia. The President Trump, because realizing that the prices had gone up to $66 a barrel till about 10 days ago, has pressurizing all these OPEC countries, particularly the Middle East ones, to effect a further increase. The expectation is what you mentioned, that it could be even 1.4 million barrels a day. If that happens, the prices would certainly fall, something with the US wants. That it is already because of the tariffs facing a difficulty in inflation in the US, and the US is still sticking to its stand. It's a rather it's a very large producer of oil, as we all know, but it is also the biggest, after China, it's the second biggest importer. It's trying to preserve its crude oil for future, and it has certainly problems of environmental clearances, both for its uh, oil extraction as well as transmission of that oil, gas pipelines, etc. That's a genuine problem. But consciously also, they want to reserve it for the future or for a rainy day. So, with their being so dependent upon the imports, they would like to ensure that the prices which the at the pump, which get paid by the US customer, those are brought down, and there is some relief as a result of a self-inflicted wound of the US by increasing the tariffs so drastically.
Indeed,
So that's, sorry, please go ahead.
Indeed, I wanted to ask a quick follow-up regarding this price drop that has taken place. The index is now below $65 per barrel. How is this to impact the OPEC plus nations? How will they react to this? Will we see them formulating any sort of strategy in the upcoming meeting?
Well, it's possible. You know, last Thursday there was an informal meeting. That's where the figures came out that we want to go up to 1.4 million barrels a day increase, etc. Today they are meeting again. The very fact that they met itself had brought down the prices to below 65 from 66 plus what was prevailing. So today I think, realizing that the US, yes, does need it, that US, they need, 4 members of the OPEC definitely want to go by, they do not want to annoy President Trump because of other matters, including strategic. I think that they are going to come with a little less cut than what they had thought of they might do earlier. And they will say that we will revisit these cuts so that the price doesn't come down too much. That it remains between 62 to, or say, 63, $64 a barrel, because they also want to make money. And OPEC is one of the largest, it is the largest cartel in the world. And one of the purposes is that the good returns to all its members, or fair returns they call them. I think, so you might see a smaller cut, which will result in smaller reduction in prices, but the trend would be clear, saying we would, for the year 26, we will be meeting again after a couple of months to review the situation, and Russia is going to be Russia will go by its own stand, saying that yes, we are attending the meeting, we are contributing our bit to the increase, but it's going to be a very modest one. And for them, the reason is very clear: as long as the sanctions prevail upon them, upon the energy sales which they can effect, they will be kind of justifying it. Though I feel that the Russian stand is going to be a little different in terms of natural gas exports as compared to the oil exports, because natural gas, the biggest customer for Russian natural gas is Europe. And as winter is setting in, then the pipeline system stretches all the way from Russia, North Sea, to the Baltic Sea, all the way to Germany. And we've been hearing about some deliberate cutting of the pipeline, etc. Ukraine being blamed. So on that, they might be willing to increase it, because there is a demand and it doesn't affect the prices so much as their increased production of crude oil affects the revenue for Russia.
All right, sir. With that, I would like to thank you for taking out time, sharing your analysis with us on NewsX World. Viewers, due to paucity of time, it's a wrap on this bulletin. More news and updates on the other side. Stay tuned.